Well, in the interest of time, we want to go ahead and get things started this morning. This is one of the really exciting parts of the program, to hear the reports from the various groups. Now, Jeff Chancellor is going around, and I see Igor is too, passing out evaluation forms. We have gotten the forms back for the Friday session, but we want to put them in your hands for yesterday and today, so we can get as many comments about the program as possible. It helps us not only evaluate the program for the quality of it, but also it helps us get ideas about what we might do to make things better as we look ahead to the future. So they're very important forms. The credits for continuing education are not given for this program. That's a technical thing, but many physicians would like for that to be the case, where their laws require a documentation of certain amount of that kind of professional education. But someday maybe we'll be able to accomplish that. But please complete the forms, and if you would either leave them here on the table or take them out to the entry table where the staff is sitting, and leave them there. That will help us study them later. So without any further comment, let's move ahead with Group A. And Group A was led by Dr. Yushikov, and it focused on cooperative and collaborative integrated international research initiatives and requirements for space exploration beyond Earth orbit. And let me remind everyone to get a headset. Simultaneous interpretation is available. Good.
Thank you very much. Я оказался модератором группы достаточно неожиданно для себя.
The group's moderator unexpectedly for myself.
И признаюсь, поначалу, когда началась
Initially, when active discussion started, I felt sorry that I took on that role. But afterwards, everything kind of fell in its place. The discussion became constructive. All the participants of the group provided active proposals on priorities as far as directions and focus were concerned in space medicine. In spite of a large record, over 10 pages and a 2-hour-long meeting, we have worked out joint positions. We have edited them in the evening later, and right now we have conveyed them to this forum so that they give an evaluation. I am not sure if they have to project, if we have to project them on the screen, because everybody has them on hand right now. For our discussion, it was very significant that Mr. Charles Bolden participated, and he was geared towards practical implementation of the developed recommendations, and that was very helpful in making them more specific, although they are a summary, and you could see it from the text. And as far as the comments to the text that you have with you right now, you can think about some constructive additions, supplements, because we might have missed something. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, in the evening, maybe it was the effect of a good dinner, I have an addition to that list. The group participants agreed that there is a reliable and stable mechanism of cooperation that provides human research on the basis of international group as well as on the basis of Russian-American group that has been in existence for about 4 decades altogether, as we have counted. However, there is room for improvement in our work, and that's what was discussed primarily. And there is a 4-item list that was developed. They are not in the order of priorities they represent here, but they were simply listed. And probably doesn't make sense to put priorities by them or hierarchy. One of them is that it is necessary to have an agreement at the level of agency heads, and that coordinated international effort on board the International Space Station is important, and that it has to involve all partners, all national agencies. Charlie Bolden emphasized that, and this is what has been recorded in the first item. The best of all, it would be the ideal case scenario would be if we would have intergovernmental agreements. The next one is to establish an international working group with scientific leadership of state programs, manager participations, directors of state research institutions, as well as non-governmental or possibly commercial organizations that deal in areas of science in technology, those who represent all the nations, all the national agencies, and not just national space national agencies. And the examples were provided in order to jointly prioritize, integrate management of science on ISS, and also on the low Earth orbit and beyond. As far as the subject of beyond the Earth orbit, the subject wasn't discussed, but it was mentioned. And from our point of view, such proposals, which were discussed in our discussion, pertain to that kind of research. In our proposal, you see there are sub-items, sub-bullets. This is working with space agencies that are responsible for funding allocation, resource allocation. The next one is prioritize the projects that have high scientific value, and it should be based on the evaluation. It is emphasized that those decisions should be based on the evaluation of the worthiness of those projects from the science point of view. The third one is active involvement of crew in research project design and also in its implementation, and as well as execution of effective communication with the crew as far as scientific research is concerned. And the fourth one is enhancement of crew crew involvement in multinational research projects. And so these are 4 items, and certain recommendations were highlighted as high priority. They're on the second page for
администратору НАСА, господину Чарльзу Болдену.
in order to convey those to the NASA administrator, Mr. Charles Bolden. And they include the following items. There are 8 items. Those are cardiovascular research, life support systems research, radiation, the research spectrum starting with monitoring and development of protection, radiation protection for various types of radiation. Especially it's pertinent for long-term flights, sensor motor systems, and it's a scope of issues. Telerobotic systems, onboard medical support systems, short radius centrifuge on board, and propulsion systems, or prospects of new propulsion systems in space. So these are 8 items, and it seems to me that we have missed psychophysiological element, and I would like to add that particular item to the section of psychophysiology. And it's especially important for the second part of discussion in our group, where interplanetary perspectives were discussed, because this factor becomes one of the first priority factors. And I'm proposing to add that statement, psychophysiological research. Overall, I have said everything I wanted to say, and I'm ready to answer your questions, hear constructive criticism, or accept additional additions to this proposal. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation of the Group A discussion. I have a question and a comment, or maybe 2 comments. Your third bullet, increase in crew involvement earlier in research project design, sounds like a worthwhile goal. I'm concerned about the implementation. We find, talking to our colleagues in the space station planning business, that astronauts are already almost inaccessible even for baseline data collection after they're assigned to a mission. It's very, very difficult to get into the astronaut's schedule because of the heavy training load. I wonder how it might be possible to involve those same astronauts in experiment design, which necessarily takes place months and years before that even occurs. Is the group interested in having the involvement of generic astronauts who will end up on the space station, or is the group interested in having the involvement of the actual astronauts who would participate in those investigations? Just for a question, just for discussion or contemplation. And if I might, a second question relates to your list of prioritized research on the second page, and that is I endorse strongly the idea of new propulsion systems. Anything that gets us between planets faster necessarily reduces the exposure to the deleterious, to the unfavorable effects of spaceflight. And I would like to suggest for the group's discussion or contemplation, the short radius centrifuge be viewed as a stopgap. Actually, the desired technology might be a long radius centrifuge, the rotation of the entire spacecraft, to minimize the effects of weightlessness on the human body, which either independently or in combination with enhanced propulsion would act to reduce most of our problems, I believe, for long-duration spaceflight. I'm not sure the long-term benefit of the short radius centrifuge, but I think we are wise to consider the use of long radius centrifuge and constant 1G exposure for long-duration spaceflights. Thank you very much for listening to my comments.
Maybe I can comment on those 2 questions. The first one, I think the groups wish was to get the particular astronauts going to participate in the particular experiments. What was the highest wish, and how it could be done. Yeah, if it's possible to reprioritize maybe the crew's training schedule somehow, or can imagine maybe some astronauts will be more payload heavy in the training and others more system heavy. Just to throw out some idea about the centrifuge. Yeah, the discussion yesterday just happened to focus around the proposal to have a short radius centrifuge on ISS, which is now in discussion. But I agree with you, of course, from a long perspective, it would be even more interesting to have a long arm centrifuge.
Just a comment, John and Dr. Yushikov, and I don't know if this is discussed in Group A, but we recently had the habitability workshop at Johnson Space Center, and one of the issues that came up, now this was in discussion about habitable volume, was keeping the crew occupied and engaged in meaningful work on a mission to a NEO, for example. And we know from other isolated confined environments like the Antarctic that those individuals who are most engaged in their work are the happiest and tend to do the best overall through the mission. And so I just find it interesting that that was also discussed in the terms of the habitability workshop as a way to keep individuals engaged and maintain team harmony, etc. One of the possibilities was to task the astronaut in their training with the PI, etc., for whatever the science payload or the science mission may be for that mission. So it's interesting that it's coming up a number of times.
Let me talk in Russian because I don't know how to formalize properly in English what I would like to say. Я думаю, что действительно подытожен наш вчерашняя дискуссия.
I think that we really have been able to summarize our discussion yesterday in a reasonable and practical way. And not only our discussion has been summarized, but the discussions that preceded it and that have been fed into this presentation, for the exception of two items that I believe need to be added, but I apologize ahead of time. I really do fail to understand how to formulate them. One of those items, this really speaks clearly on regards of the cooperation and participation of our management and agencies. But then we didn't specify what was discussed during that day. It wasn't in our particular discussion of Group A, but it came up on multiple occasions during the day. That cooperation needs to start with scientific collaboration. That this is where projects need to be born out of, and we did capture it here. That the fact that we need to enhance and improve crew interaction and to involve the crew in our activities, to make them interested and excited, and it's really important. But I think equally important is establishing the contact and network among us scientists to get us involved in joint experiments. And it was noted yesterday during the day to make sure that there are no unilateral projects only, that they are joint, truly joint projects and experiments the way it used to be before. So improving, or rather building some sort of a mechanism of enhancing collaborative mechanisms, scientist-to-scientist collaborative mechanism, to get them interested, to get them driven, to get involved in joint cooperation and joint projects and joint investigative experiments is key. Secondly, once again, not during the Group A discussion, but during the day before that, we mentioned on a couple occasions the need to find the mechanism of creating programs, goal-oriented programs, not intended to solve particular issues. Those do have a reason to exist too, but I'm talking about creating mechanism of building certain research-oriented projects that would involve international teams that would be talking exploration and researching exploration. I think this would be fairly important to try to language this in a fashion proper to be captured in the record. Okay. I think I have it down. I'll try to come up with some kind of language to capture that clearly. And I would like to address this to the cosmonauts and astronauts. Maybe you guys have something to offer to what Otto and the other speakers have mentioned. And maybe to answer John's question, I'll need to say this. And by the way, thanks, Krister, for helping me out with trying to answer the question that I would probably tackle in the same fashion. Maybe some other crew members would like to chime in as to how to engage you better in the creative cooperation with the scientists, because we are concerned about this. We, I mean us back home and other countries too. You know, this is something that's a concern and a worrisome factor for the agency heads, and we do, do assure you that this is the case in Russia and among other agencies as well. So it's quite a critical issue. Do we go there, or do we just leave it in the framework type of language that we have there, that just kind of predefines, so to speak, gives us the starting point at best? Any other takers?
Could I make a comment? I was wondering about whether you had discussed nutrition amongst the priorities. It is evident that there is some issues around nutrition and knowledge gaps, which may also be relevant in relation to the psychophysiology aspects. One of the observations relating to a reduced folate has implications in terms of the level of homocysteine in the system, which is also associated with hostility. And on a long-term mission, this might be very important to have cooperation, a research program to address these issues as well.
Вопросы, непосредственно связанные с питанием, на группе не обсуждались.
Nutrition proper wasn't really discussed at our group session. I have a suspicion that these issues are being looked into and improved upon in the United States, in Russia. And this is a set of issues that we do have to acknowledge exist. It's one of the areas that, and I can only speak for the Russian side and for the Russian participants. This is an area that involves a lot of criticism, and righteously so. There's a joint solution that exists in Russia between the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center and our institute and all the appropriate entities and services that are involved in this process, and we're working towards this goal. Having said that, I don't believe that this is something that needs to be elevated and made an international issue. Let's think about it a little bit first. Of course, if we're trying to apply this to interplanetary flights, then this is a valid point, because nutrition will probably accelerate in importance. It will become more acute, especially if we're talking about traditional means of delivery. So it goes without saying that it ties into the whole scope of problems. Psychophysiology, as you said, and it goes right into developing new propulsion systems as well. It won't be too much of a criminal act if we were to add this item to the list of the list we have in this document, because this is an issue that comes up regularly, and it ties very well into the whole scope of issues that we're dealing with. What are you saying?
Добавляем?
Should we add it?
Добавляем. Спасибо.
Let's do it. Thank you.
As a nutritionist and food scientist, the whole life support issues for exploration are a long ways from being figured out, and obviously that fits with propulsion too. And we have no idea how to get food, water, and air into a long exploration mission. We want to, as we talked about yesterday, to be able to close the system for at least air and water and use plants as part of that, but there's huge infrastructure issues. But right now, if we have to send food, we don't have a mechanism to send food without freezers, which we're probably not going to have. We don't have any kind of mechanism to send food for a 2 or 3 year mission. And he mentioned folic acid, but there will a lot of be both palatability and nutrients that will be degraded because we don't have the packaging material to hold those foods for that long of a period. Obviously, our Russian colleagues have done a lot of work in food packaging and nutrition, and I would definitely add this as the life support system. There's a lot of expertise within the agencies, and if we were to put resources behind solving these for exploration, I think that the engineers and the nutritionists and food scientists are there. So it would be nice to have it as part of the life support system. That would be my recommendation.
Спасибо. Может быть, вы тогда сразу предложите
Thank you. Maybe
формулировку, которую мы
while you're at it, you'll come up with the language that we can incorporate it here. So is it just nutrition or nutrition as part of a whole scope of issues? Somebody needs to chime in with the proposed language because everything else is a 1 or 2 word item. How do we capture this verbose statement?
I would say the life support system, a closed life support system
yes.
that included quality air, water, and food and nutrition. Is that short enough for you?
Игорь Борисович, мы имеем там life support system. Может быть, просто действительно писать включая то-то и то, что сказала Эллен.
Yeah, we can just say parenthetically, including the items just mentioned.
То есть просто уточнить нашу формулировку.
We just need to
Life support system.
define
Okay.
it.
Добавляем в этот пункт.
So let's add it there.
Расширяем его.
So we'll elaborate on the life support system item, so that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Еще?
Anything else?
To go back to the crew involvement
Хотелось бы вернуться к
for
участию
just a moment.
экипажа. Минуточку буквально.
And because I think there's only one person who was actually flight crew that answered. And so
Только один человек от имени.
no, it's not on. Oh, he can't hear. He's not getting a translation. It's okay now? Okay. All right. So this is about the crew involvement, and I'm not crew, obviously, but I can speak to, by personal experience, with the value of having crew involvement and having crew that are intellectually invested in the experiments that are being done. And I can cite specific examples of that on short term with the shuttle, and in long term on Mir, where crew were so intellectually invested, had trained with us and understood the problems, were able to resolve problems and salvage experiments without loss of data that were very, very expensive and very long-term experiments on Mir. And so I think that the statement needs to be strengthened in some way or another, because the future of the station, the priority is research. And so I understand that their time is very valuable and that there are a lot of operational things that they have to do. But research has to be established at a new priority. And I think that should be included in the statement, that research should be established as a new priority, and that we have to consider the fact that these individuals will spend time in the laboratory and will become invested in the experiments.
Спасибо. Это очень существенное дополнение.
Thank you for this valid contribution.
Все пункты и составлялись с учетом
I have to tell you that all of these items were drafted and we were gearing ourselves towards optimization our activities and our operations on the station. And if I understand correctly, you want to add some statement on the on expanding the time contribution to the science and utilization.
Actually, just the crew involvement. The statement, I guess it's number 3, bullet number 3, about the crew involvement. Just to emphasize in there that the importance of having them intellectually invested and that they are engaged early in the phase of the preparation of the experiments and understanding and being able to conduct the experiments.
Окей, тогда, может быть, так.
In that case, how about this? Let's add to the beginning of item 3 something like, with the understanding the priority of science, especially in the long term, for the missions of the future, and then we'll just kind of dovetail it into what you said. So it will be proposal number 3. In other words, to emphasize the importance of science and research, especially for the future missions and future projects, or something like that. I don't believe that it will water item 3 down. It only enforce it a little bit. Okay, thank you. Mr. Bolden?
At the risk of, of saying something I shouldn't say, I will speak as a former crew member and not as the NASA administrator. So you need to understand this. And listening to John and thinking back on the conversations that that several of us have had over the last few days, the way we used to do it in the U.S. was that crew members were assigned, prior to being assigned to fly, crew members were assigned to various subject areas, and they worked it for years, became sort of the subject matter experts, and then when a crew was assigned for a particular mission, then it was up to the astronaut office to parlay that that wealth of information that the small group of crew members had to those that were really going to fly. And I think that's what we're saying we would like to do, because the crew really does want to be involved up front. They want to be involved because frequently, if I based on my own experience, we could see every once in a while where principal investigators generally like to do things that are independent of the crew, because you're never, crew time is never reliable. It's never a reliable asset. But we find in flight that sure would have been good had we known a little bit more about the experiment, so that we could have stepped in and salvaged even an autonomous experiment. So I think that's the discussion that's being had here. And going back to what Neil said, we keep saying we've got to change the way we do business. And I do believe that includes the approach that we take to crew members. Again, going back to one of my flights, a big difference was the Russian crew members receive pay for certain things. American crew members never do that, because they come into the program knowing that, they do what they're told to do, and their pay is flying. I think this is the challenge. For the reason I recommended yesterday that we get the heads of agency involved is because this is the challenge that we have to work from the top down, where when we select crew members, they know that they're coming in because if they're on station, they're performing research for further exploration. If they're on an exploration mission, they're going to do things that have not been done before, and so they're going to have to make some sacrifices. But those kinds of statements to crew members need to be made up front in selection, so that everybody understands, and so that no matter what nation they represent, they all work on the same general set of guidelines. That's going to be hard. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, okay? But I'm just saying I think that's what we're all trying to say, you know, in different ways.
Well, I think you're quite right, Charlie, that you need to say it up front because it's important. But I think you need to go back to the training and the operations relative to the way we did them when you were in the office, because they moved away from that. So I think that was a way of getting the crew involvement with the experiments early on. And I think, as everyone is saying, that's extremely important to do. So I think it's a matter of getting the astronaut office and the training schedulers to go back to that kind of an operation.
One other dimension I think that's important to remember, in the early days, I was involved in half a dozen different space labs in the 80s, and I remember that we had these sessions that were called true training, much more time than was available then is available now. But I remember as we got into it, we realized it really wasn't crew training, it was PI training. They were training us as well as to how to make our experiments practical. And we've lost that in the interim. I know that there was some informal discussion. There is enthusiasm within the current astronaut office. There are a number of crew members who have gone to Peggy Whitson and asked to have an enhanced science role. And it just, the time wasn't quite ripe. And I think the message they got was they just needed some direction from on high.
I think we have an excellent opportunity right now, but the time is right, because if you look at the head of GCTC is Sergey, and Sergey understands the need to do this stuff. The chief of the astronaut office is Peggy, and Peggy is a former, a very diligent principal investigator for whom I worked. And she's a hard taskmaster. And I think we've just got to find ways for people who are in positions of responsibility and authority, as George said, up front to say, okay, if you're going to stay in the office, if you want to have this type of work, then here are some of the guidelines for what will be expected of you.
Excuse me. My name is Jim Pelosi, and I have 5 years with the training division, 5 years with the payloads office and the science investigations that are demonstrated in orbit. And we heard my coach say yesterday that there are 120 ongoing science investigations. Okay, so if we take a look at our current crew members on station, like Paolo Nespoli, Katie Coleman, Ron Garin, who, by virtue of having to get to station, need to travel up on Soyuz, and a lot of their training now is involved with learning the Russian language and learning the characteristics of Soyuz flight, we have absolutely diminished the available time for them, to be able to get involved with the science. So I think for the crew truly to be involved ahead of time is a very, very difficult proposal. I think just getting the crew familiarized with those 120 investigations that Mike said are ongoing in this current increment is an extreme chore in itself. And I think that the difficulty with respect to crew orientation or crew involvement early on has to do with the current means by which we are training, at least the American crew members, who spend an awful lot of time now commuting back and forth between the United States and Russia, learning the Russian language, learning the characteristics of the Soyuz. We've lost a lot of opportunity back when we were just using shuttle and they were staying at JSC and they had much more time on their hands to learn.
Well, that's why I think it is important to take the approach as we did previously, as Charlie outlined it, where we had people assigned to specialist areas, and they would go ahead and ensure that early involvement, ensure the crosstalk between the crew members and the principal investigators, and then they would go ahead and transmit that to the assigned crew members. And that's the way we did it then. And we were certainly pressed for training schedules then, no more than they are now. But I think that was an approach we did use, and it worked very well.
Thank you for this substantial comment, and I would like to give you one example and explain the situation which has developed right in front of my eyes. And I came to think about it after Charles and George's presentation. People are in charge. People manage everything. Physicians and I'm only talking about the life science experiments and the astronauts. After the 21st expedition, the number of life science experiments started being greatly reduced on the Russian segment. I wanted to find out what was the issue, and it became complex. So I addressed Sergei Krikalev, and I said, what's wrong? Whose fault is it? And is there something we can do to correct that? We're going to adapt to the situation when we organize those experiments. And if you have a wave of refusals by cosmonauts to carry out certain experiments, then they can't turn them down. And he said, okay, I'm going to do the appropriate work, and we're going to clarify it, help us clarify the situation. So we had a number of meetings, a number of conversations took place, and the situation was not great, but it became a little improved, a little better than it used to be. And I think that this conversation has to be ongoing on an individual basis, exactly what George mentioned here, and the subject of science is a separate subject, and individual subject is personal, and we have to have personal approach to each cosmonaut and astronaut. And thank you. I'm out of time here, and we're infringing upon Group B. Do you have any additions or comments?
Thank you very much.
Let's move right along with Group D. Christian Otto is the leader of that group. And do we have the materials available to be passed out for Group D? All slides. They're all slides. Okay, let's be sure we leave something here today.
Definitely. There is a copy available already. Good morning, everybody. I think it's testimony to everyone's dedication to see so many people here through the weekend and on a Sunday. I know I wasn't the most popular person leaving the house this morning. So if we could just advance this, will that get our first slide up? I apologize that there's some slides. I wanted, with Dr. Alford and Mr. Abbey's permission, report to you some of the progress we've made since last year, because this is the third year that we've discussed analogs. How do I get the first slide up? And so just wanted to give you a...
This is one of the reasons we don't last
Yeah. I did ask your permission this morning, and I recall you said yes.
Well, that's not what I did.
Okay. All right. I hope it'll be acceptable. In any event, we've made significant progress over the past 3 years in discussing analogs, and I'd like to share a bit of that with you today, and then go over some of the further points that we added in discussion Group B yesterday on integrated international analog and space collaborative research projects, because we're all here to discuss space collaboration. So as you know, we've really been building or attempting to build on this success, starting with the analogs group in 2009, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was to convene an annual international analog workshop. And do we need to establish an international space analog network? And it's become quite apparent that we do. And That was in 2009, and shortly thereafter, a number of individuals, Dr. Leviton from NASA, Oliver Anger, this was an international effort, and a number of others organized a workshop on human behavior and performance in analog environments and simulation. So it was a behavior and human performance focus, but analogs were the underlying theme. And this was held in Noordwijk in the Netherlands. It was part of the ISSOWIG meeting, and it was a very successful meeting. Out of that workshop, there were over 60 international participants. The recommendations were to conduct a series of studies with a structured approach, select analogs according to research questions, and you'll see this theme throughout, utilizing ISS for increments longer than 6 months, more integration and multidisciplinarity in research announcements are required, more international cooperation, and these sorts of things should be repeated. Now, based on last year's ISMS in 2010, that's a typo there, it was felt that we really had to put some teeth into this, into the international collaboration on analog utilization. And that was a takeaway message last year. And so plans were set in motion to actually convene an international workshop to try and put together a program, a group, and a charter. And so based on the extensive discussions in 2009 and 2010, we put together an online survey with all the issues that were brought up. We sent it to all the participants in the analog group for 2009-2010 ISMS. We sent it to agency representatives, analog operators, analog experts, and researchers. And they were asked to rank these issues because we really wanted to get at the hot button issues that people were concerned with. There were 78 individuals who received this, and we had a 42% return, which for people who are as busy as yourselves, we thought that that was pretty good. And so this started last August. And so through the fall, we spent a lot of time organizing this. It was very important this be an international effort. Again, Dr. Anger from ESA was involved. Barbara Corbin from NASA HRP, the deputy director, really spearheaded the effort. So I don't think she's here today, but she did an incredible amount of work to push this forward. And there are a number of others. So we ended up having panel chairs. I just wanted to go over some of the issues that we discussed. Here's just a list of the individuals who have participated. We had people from the Russian Academy of Sciences, IBMP, ESA, CSA, the German Aerospace Center, Dr. Gertzer was there, JAXA, and of course scientists and representatives from the analogs and so on. Our goals were to develop an international analog collaborative framework, strategic milestones, which is important, and strategize on the use of analog network in addressing long-duration spaceflight health and performance risks. So the panels, there was a lot of work in organizing these panels in terms of what were the key issues, and this is how it played out. Number one was role of analogs in addressing the human spaceflight risk. Analog operators, so defining the individual analogs, because there's a wide variety of analogs, as all of you know, with different capabilities and different specificities. Matching research needs with analog capabilities. And we hear this over and over and over again. It's really key, and that has a cost-value return as well. ISS is an analog for future long-duration spaceflight missions. I think that's become a very hot topic recently. How to leverage space station for future long-duration flight. So there was a panel on that. Effective and optimal use of analogs, because not everyone has the same viewpoint. Agency representatives, operators, and users all have a slightly different approach. And of course, one of the big issues with international collaboration was catalysts and barriers. What are the issues that are preventing international partners, researchers, and users from collaborating? And of course, archiving data was another issue. So as not to reinvent the wheel every decade. And so out of that meeting, which was held in April at USRA here in Houston from the 6th to the 8th, the third day the first 2 days was an open discussion, and the third day was sort of a roll up your sleeves, closed working group to sort of put this all together. But the recommendation was the establishment of an international human life sciences spaceflight analog working group. It's a mouthful. RWAG, I guess, is the acronym. And sorry for the wordiness of the next couple of slides, but just to go over it in brief, this group will operate within the framework of the International Space Life Sciences Working Group and the Joint Working Group, ISOWIG and JWG. It'll provide a forum to coordinate activities and exchange research information directly related to cooperative planning and execution of human space life sciences research in space and the flight analog environments. It'll focus on research in world-class facilities and analog environments. Decided to leave bed rest out of this because they're covered by other working groups, and the research focus will be key questions with multilateral interest that require the use of analog environments. Specifically, this group will define the problems of interest to all members requiring collaboration in these environments. What are the analogs best suited for collaborative interest? We felt there was a number of representatives there from the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, and certainly the Antarctic has been seen as a very effective analog, so much so that it was felt there should be a formal connection with the SCAR group, and in particular the expert group on human biology and medicine, to foster those interests and those research opportunities. Because on the medical side in the Antarctic, as a member of that group, I can testify that they're looking for valuable research to conduct because they all report to their national organizations and they see links with the space community as being very effective. So it would be a very useful relationship. Established life sciences representation in International Space Exploration Coordination Group and their analog working group, and define standard measures, which we heard come up again yesterday and the past couple of years. I think this is the last slide on what the group hopes to achieve. Explore development of uniform methods to store and access data, communicate the status of each member's current plans and solicitations. We heard that come up yesterday. How does a group of researchers in one country know what's happening in another country? So this international framework would provide a mechanism so that information could be distributed and we're not repeating research efforts. Again, this has a cost value return. Facilitate interaction between discipline experts in order to have the full benefit of international expertise. Again, that's an issue of leveraging expertise across countries and organizations, and continue these annual workshops and discourse. So in fact, again, thanks to Barbara Corbin, there's actually a draft charter of the Human Life Sciences International Spaceflight Analog Research Working Group, and I have a copy of this here, and two copies. I'd just like to read to you the first sentence, which I think really underscores the importance that this meeting has had in stimulating this type of work. And so let me read that to you. In May 2009, the International Space Medicine Summit, sponsored by the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, invited representatives from the international space community to hold discussions on analog environments and their use in human performance research and operations. That is the first sentence of this charter. And I have a couple of draft copies that I'd like to give to you, Mr. Abbey, and to Dr. Alford. So I think hopefully that's something that this meeting can see as a deliverable and a concrete step forward in spin-offs, if you will. So getting to yesterday's discussion, we had, I think, 24 group members, a wide cross-section of individuals, and quickly broke this down. We talked about analogs in general, and there was a lot of discussion about the definition, and Dr. Strobe suggested that an analog should be defined as the capability to mimic expected conditions and its effect on the individual. That probably refers to operational analogs, because over the years, there's definitely a difference between an operational analog and a research analog, if you will. For example, parabolic flight, radiation, and there are others. The idea of an environmental versus analog came up, which is not quite a research analog, but perhaps you want to expose a mission concept, etc., technology or technique to a specific austere environment. I mentioned the issue with radiation parabolic flight. A theme that we kept hearing, and again we feel that this mechanism would be able to address that, is that researchers want to know, where do I go to find out about a particular analog? Whether it's how does it suit our research, what are the specifics in terms of logistics just to get there? If I have to run an experiment, what are the power sources and so on? The next topic was analogs and the researchers. There was felt that there was a need to add characteristics of the analogs to the solicitations. So if there is an agency-wide solicitation and there are certain analogs, researchers probably want to know what are the specifics in terms of conducting research in that analog. And there shouldn't be just a list of facilities, but as I've been alluding to, what can the facilities do? Also what risks are associated with the analog? So for example, if you're doing a habitability mock-up in Building 9, the risk associated with that is a lot different than if you're sending a crew to a remote field camp in the Antarctic. There were a lot of discussion that tended to fall into the topic of a role for an international body. There are differences between agencies and how they solicit for analog work, and the suggestion came up, should there be a joint or unilateral solicitations? And it's important to develop a strategy on how to do this across international agencies. And hopefully a group such as this would provide that mechanism. However, the point was made that it's difficult to get a body to assign the task to the analog. It's easier to get agreement on the framework and then allow this collaboration. Haven't we done this before? Joint solicitation for experiments, so perhaps there is a precedent. This particular group, though, would focus on mission analogs, not environmental analogs. I think the research analogs, let's just say research analogs. It will focus on mission and environment, but not research analogs. As I mentioned, we have a draft charter. Another issue that came up was, how do you get point of contacts for different analog access? So again, a database was felt to be able to alleviate this issue. Again, I refer to the Antarctic. There's a lot of logistics in terms of getting your science and research packages deployed there. And the NSF does have a package that provides that information. So can this be made available for all of the analogs? Defining the research, this was a question that came up over and over again, and we've seen it the past 2 years as well. And the concept that we really need to link the research questions to the analog. And a number of examples were brought up. You know, just because you have an interesting analog that may have a lot of appeal, that's not a reason to conduct research. What is the research question? Define those first, and then match that to the capabilities of the analog and what will give you the greatest return. BHP has done work in that area, and they've also looked at cost as well, because obviously you've got to figure that in. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to fidelity. Science should drive the analog requirements. What is the scientific value of the question? So this gets to organizing risks and categorizing the risks, and what are your most important risks. And this point was brought up. Historically, analogs were not designed to answer research questions, but it's important to identify the questions. Again, you're hearing this theme over and over again. What are the hypotheses? The right answer is scenario dependent. So again, that's about picking the right analog. And we've heard this many times in the past as well, is analog misuse, and that's referring to just putting adding too many experiments. Pascal Lee called it the Christmas tree effect. You just keep hanging things on the Christmas tree ornaments, and eventually it falls over. Okay. I I like this issue, and this has come up before, analogs as, and if you will, a TRL maturity process, and all that really means is that you can use a stream of analogs to develop a concept, whether it's a technology or a methodology. You can start, again, for example, an analog in the lab or a mock-up facility, test your initial concepts, and then mature that through various analogs, increasing your fidelity so that you have a cost return. You're not making significant mistakes in a very expensive analog, for example, on the ISS. As we mentioned here, flows related to maturing the answer. And this, again, could be a mandate for this international group. We agree on what the key risks are and how to approach those risks, and it could be answered through a number of analogs. One example was the mock-up facility that was felt to be integral to the Skylab mission. Another issue that fits closely with that is analog fidelity. And a topic of discussion was how do you address the fact that Mars 500, they're not really going anywhere? How do you compensate for motivation, etc.? Yeah, but that is true. However, the strengths of Mars 500, and there are many of them, is that you can control the experimental conditions to a significant degree, which if you go to a field analog, such as the Antarctic or HMP on Devon Island, you're not able to control the field conditions. So it's more like a controlled experiment, if you will. So there'll be a great number of lessons learned from that point of view, and then you can move that to a more austere analog. Again, there are cost savings for doing that. So there are advantages to doing isolation studies and controlling the variables. Risk averse and danger came up. This fits in with this idea of analog fidelity. So the more risky the analog, the more likely you are to have adverse outcomes. And of course, the most serious being death, which came up. We certainly have had deaths in the Antarctic, and as you know, there's been a death of a tender at Nemo. So this was felt, this was raised yesterday as well as a consequence of that analog maturation process. But it was the Russian experience, it was felt that they have benefited greatly from analogs and testing concepts in analog environments. And they've been very helpful to understand concepts and moving them to spaceflight. One of the last topics we discussed was answering the habitability question. That's been a very topical issue recently with the HEFT group looking at what the optimal volume would be of a spacecraft for a NEA mission. And it was felt that you really have to have the right analog for the right question. And this was brought up in terms of habitability issues. And it was felt, again, this gets back to that idea, some can be answered on campus. Again, do you want to run off and build a mock-up and put it, say, on Devon Island in the high Arctic and test it there before you've really sort of thought about the size, probably run a few people through it, done a couple of multi-day, perhaps multi-week studies to tweak that before you go to a higher cost, higher risk environment. And again, it was felt that the International Analog Working Group could be involved in this. Analogs in team selection and training, that was brought up by certainly Lauren Levitin and Dr. Charles. Obviously, analogs are also excellent training venues because of the conditions that they model in terms of spaceflight, austere environments, isolation. And again, Mars 500 was brought up in terms of the training that was done with the candidates before deploying to the analog. And because someone had mentioned that, you know, how often do ISS crew members get to train together? How much time do they really spend together? And with the 12 candidates for Mars 500, they spent 4 months training together. And I think our Russian colleagues, from my understanding, do a very good job of observing crew members training together and then trying to select the best possible crews to accomplish what the mission is, etc. And it was felt that analogs could be used for this, and we've seen it in NEMO, for example, with 2-week missions. Often there are significant CB representation there, but could this be used for training and team selection for longer duration missions down the road? And just the idea of, crew training, those of you who read Malcolm Gladwell and the 10,000 hour rule, so it just seems to make sense that if you want a team to function effectively, you probably want them to train together for a certain period of time. And ISS as an analog, that certainly came up again, and we had at least one person from MOD in the room, and I think with the iStar project in trying to develop a research scenario for ISS and a time delay, one of the concerns is, ISS was built for a specific purpose. It's relatively rigidly operated. There's not a lot of flexibility. So how do you compromise that to be able to accomplish these research objectives? So that was certainly one thing that was identified. And this is the last issue we addressed, was analogs for medical simulation and training. And I thought that was very interesting. And being a physician, I was certainly glad to hear this come up. But medical simulation and medical evacuation drills, how often are they performed on ISS? There certainly is training. It tends to be, as we were told, where's the equipment, get the equipment out, but have they actually had, for example, a crew member feigns a acute coronary syndrome, etc. Hasn't been done apparently with ISS, but a lot of these types of scenarios done on NEMO. Certainly in other isolated, confined environments, it is very critical to train like you play, because in the event that you do have a medical tragedy or a serious medical event, that training pays enormous dividends, and I can speak to that personally. So these certain analogs can be used for medical simulation and training. We've all talked about medical crew officer. Yet doesn't matter how, if that person is a physician, doesn't matter how good he or she is, there'll be events where they either need an extra pair of hands. How are you going to train those people? Because they will not all be medical practitioners, etc. So analogs could play a very important role there. So with that, that sort of is the end of what I had to present to you. That was our discussion. So I guess we'll try and build on that and perhaps take a lot of that back to this international working group and try and incorporate that. Thanks for your attention.
Christian, once again, I know I sound like I'm rabid about slides, but it's what consensus did you reach? What are the clear points of consensus the committee agreed upon that these are the higher priority things that we must do? Just I've told this story before, but sometimes people say that a slide can convey 1,000 words. But oftentimes it's the reverse. It takes 1,000 words to show one slide. So, but where in that is there this consensus? We saw in Group A a very crisp outline of things that they had addressed and agreed upon and wanted to recommend and move forward, and that's what we really need to have. Creating more bureaucracy only complicates things. A bureaucracy of all these groups and so on. That's the danger of that. But so that's what I'm asking for. What were the consensus points, and what would be somewhat analogous to what we've already heard in a splendid way from Group A?
I guess I'd have a two-part answer to that. The first part is that because the nature of the community, the international aspect to it, that there is so much activity going on, and I think the advantage is we've been able to conduct this group now over a period of 3 meetings, and it's become clear that there needs to be some kind of group, body, forum where it's a sort of a central point, if you will, that people can come together and collaborate and look at the important questions facing long-duration space flight, and how can we use the analogs effectively to answer these questions. Effectively means getting to the answer more quickly. It means doing it with lower cost. I mean, it simply doesn't make sense if we're 4 different groups are testing the same question in 4 different analogs. We're not leveraging the expertise. We all know that we're operating in an environment with fiscal restraints. Money is not plentiful. So I think that's an overarching theme. We tried to focus the discussion earlier with suggesting 2 topics. One was ISS as an analog, because that's so topical right now, and the other one was habitability. Clearly, group members have issues that they want to raise. I think that many of the issues that were raised spoke to the importance of having a central point and a clearinghouse, because it seems to be an issue of communication, being able to access analogs, being able to work cooperatively and to answer the questions. And this is the 3rd year being involved in this group. For me, it just spoke to the fact that having a centralized body like this, and I agree with you, I think that too much bureaucracy can inhibit the process as well, but it seems clear there needs to be some mechanism to build efficiency in the system, if you will, whether that's monetary, whether that's allowing researchers from Russia to be able to work more effectively, say U.S. analogs and U.S. researchers being able to work with our Russian colleagues. We know that David Dinges is one of the only PIs we have who's been able to work with the Mars 500 project, and we've heard a number of Russian colleagues say, well, I'd really like to work on NEMO, have an experiment there, but how do I do that? So although we brought up a number of individual issues, I think those were key, that there needs to be some consensus, some body that can help support these aims. It's a bit of a long-winded answer to that.
And Dr. Alford, Mr. Abbey, I think it's really quite remarkable just in 2 meetings of this group, it just speaks to the power of this group, that after 10 years of asking for this kind of organization and never having it formed, after 2 meetings of this group, there is now an actual international organization to provide this kind of coordination for analog research. I think that's quite remarkable. And I think that it really is important that this group continue to help define the policy of how to best do analog research in an international forum. We have limited resources, and they're becoming ever more so limited. So how can we best utilize these analogs to answer important questions, and how can we get these international scientists working together on teams that they otherwise wouldn't have access to? So I think what Dr. Otto has brought forward is a very important contribution to this field.
With that, sorry if I can, I think I'd like to commend Christian and the analog team, because the conferences we've been going over this, like Christian said, for several years, and the constraints we have in funding across the board, even in academia, the opportunity to utilize these analogs and having a one place to go to actually feed opportunities in that then become basically experiments that could possibly go up and introduce new people into the whole research perspective, I think is very important. And then also with that is moving things forward. It's not a repeat of what we've discussed previously. There is actually a group that took the initiative to move things forward. And I think that's commendable for what Christian and the group have done. And I think it's fantastic. I think we should do that within this forum.
Christian, thanks very much for summarizing a long and passionate discussion in a way that makes it clear to me now what I was not able to glean in real time. A couple of points I want to agree with you strongly on the point that you make about the value of a sort of a clearinghouse, a one-stop shop for analog information. I think that's something that came through very clear. And the other thing I think I would like to have had more discussion about and more emphasis on, and maybe we can do this as a committee of the whole now, is to understand the value of analogs in addressing no fooling, operational, and architectural decisions. As you know, as the chief scientist for the Human Research Program, I have a foot in the research and a foot in the operational world, and sometimes they diverge uncomfortably. But just recently, an interesting exercise took place, and that was some effort to understand what is the minimum required volume for a near-Earth asteroid mission. What volume is required for people to live in? And as it turns out, the historical data are all based on volumes that were available and not volumes that were intended. That is, for example, Skylab was based on the Saturn IVB stage, and it happened to be available. And other modules in the space station are based on how big the payload bay of the orbiter is, and that's how big you can build them. But I was surprised to learn there is no definitive answer on the volume per person per day required for sanity or health or performance in spaceflight. And that's the kind of information that can be acquired right now from analog studies with some sort of correction for the 1G versus 0G factor. So I guess I would encourage this body to consider making that a recommendation going forward, is to give additional emphasis to solving problems that have impact on architectural decisions that are being made right now, for which this body may well be the most suited to provide that kind of information.
Thanks, John. And we threw that out there as bait, but not everyone bit. But I think it's an important issue, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly.
Let me have a little bit of your attention and try to sum up what was some of the important conclusions yesterday. If we try to estimate the analogs and compare them, we have to first of all to take into consideration the risks that analog can provide from that list of risks that was before formulated by NASA and other agencies. And comparing that list of risks for every analog, we can choose the perfect module for the next scenario of the interplanetary mission, of the landing stage, or of some other project which we need further on to launch to space. And this is the idea, to use these international analogs as a test bed for the future international space protocols, about which Inessa told us today, I think is the most important. To prepare the internationally developed protocol on the analog. And that's why we can have something which is valid, solid, and that with high fidelity can be utilized on ISS, on moon base, or somewhere else. So to make the list of analogs, to value the analogs, to define the list of the potential projects, and of course international, not national, and of course to create the scenario of the project, because yesterday we mentioned that mission scenario is important. If we are not using just environmental analog like bed rest or radiation facility, it's very important to define mission scenario. For example, for Mars 500, it was important to define the scenario of the interplanetary mission. And for the first time, for example, we defined the scenario of landing, how it will be. We defined the scenario of information delay. And that must be the objective of the international cooperation and of that group. And that was all discussed yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. I have an interest in the analog environment. As Mr. Abbey knows, when we did the 90-day study, chamber study at Johnson Space Center a few years ago, as well as the McDonnell Douglas study, Johnson's was 91, McDonnell Douglas was 90, which is nothing compared to the 500, Mars 500. But one of the issues, and I didn't really see it addressed in this, although you mentioned it with the Mars 500, is selection. Team selection. I think that, in hindsight of the 3 chamber studies I worked on, we thought we had a good mechanism for team selection. And I think we probably did the best we could, and we certainly had very dedicated team members. But I think that's an area that would really be useful, especially in the behavioral, psychological areas. How not, we sort of, we do this training and we do this, but a lot of the analogs, they don't really have a long-term period of training together. So are there characteristics? And I know some people are working on this, but I think that would be something that would work very well in the analog as to doing the research on how you could put teams together. Just a suggestion, having experienced this with 3 teams. Thanks.
No, thanks, Helen. I would agree with that, and that did come up yesterday, and we talked about it briefly. We actually put that forth as a major topic of discussion, so it was discussed briefly. And the advantage of an analog like that for team selection is that it's dynamic. You put them in an analog, you give them a task, and so you see how the individuals participate as a team effectively or not effectively. How do they, and if you put them in long enough, how do they deal with conflict? How do they overcome conflict? Because there will be conflict no matter what. So I'm a big supporter of certainly team selection using analogs. I was originally in BHP. I've seen how effective it can be in the Antarctic program. We bring people together first, and every year, we'll pick out a few folks who, we don't think should winter over. And just so thanks for those comments. I would agree with that. And just the comments that Dr. Gushin made, that came up last year as well, matching analog characteristics with the research question. It's very important to do that. It was addressed at length last year. It was incorporated and discussed also at this forum back in April. And in fact, NASA's already started to formalize a mechanism listing characteristics. BHP has led the effort in that. That's now rolled out to the Flight Analogs Project, where all the characteristics are listed for a particular analog. So, for example, a NASA researcher can come and look at this, what are the characteristics of the various analogs, and choose which ones best suits their research needs. So it's felt that moving that mechanism to more of a more international group, either making it available to all the internationals through this clearinghouse, if you will, would be very effective. I guess one of the challenges of having a discussion group that repeats is that you hope you want to build on what you did last year and not just reiterate what you've done in the past. So maybe that was the casualty of this year, is that we were trying to put down new issues. Any other questions? Great. Okay, well, thanks for your attention, and we'll make this available to people. Thanks.
Well, let's move ahead then with Group C. Its focus was educational and research needs, strategies, and opportunities for bridging the sciences and ensuring safe space exploration. Dr. Buratola.
It does not have Group C.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alford. And my talking will consist from 2 parts. One of them, first of all, I would like to say some words about our discussion. And then I will present, it will be in Russian, I'm sorry. And then I will present our findings and suggestion, and it will be in English. Я хочу сказать, что у нас была
I would like to say the following. We had a really lively discussion. in our multinational group. Represented in this group were a lot of highly qualified, very talented experts with a large body of expertise in the educational field. And that's why we think the discussion was very dynamic. We were all very much engaged in this discussion, and as a chair of this discussion, I didn't always interrupt the discussion. Maybe that was done erroneously, but I did feel like the experts had to be given a chance to speak their minds, and other experts had to be given the opportunity to hear, if not agree, with the opinion of other, with the opinion of their counterparts from other space agencies, other universities, and other colleges. And also, as an opening remark, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Karl Deutsch and Dr. Eshat Sargsyan and Dr. Jeff Chancellor for the assistance. Without your help, I would not have been able to pull this off. And so the declared topic was quite broad in scope, and everybody commented on this, everybody who was participating in this discussion. It just so happens that during the last summit, Group C was able to discuss in great detail the educational angle. We broke our group into three groups: school students, and then postgraduate students. In the recommendations that we were able to look into once again proved to be valid. And so we tried to sort of make a transition to the next phase of our discussion, and got a little bit bogged down in the issue of the interdisciplinary education. It caused quite a lot of controversy in our discussion as we were trying to jointly definitize the ways of resolving this, which realistically proved to be quite a challenge. The reason being, in various education systems, in different countries' education systems, in different levels of education systems, this process may have been represented differently. In an attempt to find some kind of common ground and a set of common recommendations, as a result, was quite a challenge that proved to be fairly difficult for us. So we still prioritize this issue as an important but an open-ended one. So the group came to an agreement that at present time it's critical to approach the interdisciplinary education at various levels, but we have not been able to see clearly how it is that we approach this as an international community and what sort of recommendations we will be able to provide to that effect. And this issue took us maybe 2.5 hours to tackle. And then we were almost about to be finished with our discussion was when we started tackling the second part of the discussion, which is called strategies.
Ensuring safe space exploration.
At first, we tried to see how it is that we can discuss this, what sorts of questions we need to be raising first. And if I were to compare the way our discussion ensued, our wave basically hit a wave breaker, if you will. Maybe the organizers were insightful enough to pose a super task in front of our group, but since we were running out of time at that point, what we would like to ask the organizers of the next summit is as follows. We'd like to address this with Mr. Abbey and Dr. Alford personally. Of course, we would like to ask for your agreement, is to recommend that we continue discussing this subject as a separate panel discussion at the next summit, because this issue is very important It's paramount, and now we're at a critical point in time, and a lot of the group mates of mine agreed to that. We are at the we're on the verge of the new phase of exploration. We need to make a transition from orbital to interplanetary. And to be able to achieve that, new questions need to be raised, and some of them are being raised for all intents and purposes. We need new approaches, and we need new solutions. In addition to that, towards the end of our discussion, we made an attempt, or more like there was a proposal made. We tried to formulate the future areas of expertise. Realistically speaking, some of them were definitized, but we opted out of discussing them as part of our group, and there are two reasons for that. Reason number one, space agencies are currently developing the critical areas of research, and roadmaps are being generated as we speak. And whether we as a group would have been able to incorporate anything radically new into that process, don't quote me for that. But I can say that we're glad to admit that Group A made that attempt. The list of critical research fields is an open list, and we are seeing this list develop here. This morning, this list was being expanded to incorporate new items. But the milestones for our future research need to be defined, not here and not now, but in the near future. And that would be critical, we think, because when we formulate for our PhD students the future research plans for the 3-4 year out-year plan, we need to at the same time pose a large issue that the PhD student would be able to make a first step towards. But it needs to be spelled out, it needs to be made visible, he needs to be made aware of this issue being there while performing their research projects that's very well defined as part of their PhD program. And now I would like to move on to a brief report and tell you about some of the findings that were formulated in our group.
Okay, and we formulate some general findings. The success of human spaceflight programs attests to effectiveness of integrated multidisciplinary approach to solving extremely complex challenges. The human space exploration program are and will be a major resource for continued advancement of human society through education, research, and application of space-derived knowledge and technology. The broad challenges should be addressed through international collaboration and standardization, cultural and national adaptivity and scalability, and will require policy decision and resources for national and international implementation. Future spaceflight will be international in scope and will constitute a blend of government and commercial activities. Space medicine and life science results have tangible impact on Earth-based medicine. This area offers numerous examples of terrestrial benefits of human space exploration. Educational outreach is an essential strategic part of national and international space program. There needs to be great interdisciplinary education and research availability at all levels of education and research, particularly for teachers working with younger children. And then three maybe more detailed part. First of all, concerning public awareness and space sciences. Findings. Public awareness of the current space exploration efforts and promise of future programs varies among countries and regions. We discuss this long time, and it's not bad and not good. It's a statement. So, and our success approaches. Sustained public awareness of space exploration results and future benefits should be considered by international bodies, governments, and private enterprises as a strategic goal to ensure broad public and political support of space program and space life sciences research. Sufficient resources should be available to disseminate both results and promise of space programs to all strategies of public with emphasis on school and university leaders, teachers, and mentors. And about education. Introduction of information derived from space sciences in early phase of education has a strong potential to stimulate interest, leading to long-lasting involvement and lifelong careers in cutting-edge areas of biomedical sciences and technologies. And suggested approaches. Education should be recommended as a strategic goal of government space programs and should be encouraged among private companies engaged in space flight and space exploration. Teacher education is an important component of this strategy. International collaboration should be pursued through forums and other opportunities among educators in space sciences, using the experience and spirit of the International Space Station and other programs. These efforts could be championed by Space Agency using existing organizational mechanisms and international bodies such as COSPAR and organization under auspices of United Nations. And when we discuss the education, one of our member of our team said that when we teach, when we have a lecture, we should add space spices in our lecture and these space spices increase the interest of student of auditorium to a lot of scientific results. Concerning advanced professional education. Advanced professional education in space sciences discipline is a strategically important area to sustain the momentum of space exploration and maximize its terrestrial benefits. Postgraduate education opportunities are a primary pathway to career choice in space sciences research and teaching. Our suggestion: more efforts should be focused on supporting broader involvement of scientists in space science research through postgraduate school curricula, as well as individual degree topics and area. We discuss also some commercial space flight and participation of commercial organization, and we would like to suggest that commercial companies should be encouraged to participate in education, and business students should receive special attention in the area of commercial space flight and space exploration. And I finish, and the end part of our discussion concerning ensuring safe space exploration. We have mentioned that current and future space science should push the advance in medical standard and operational requirements for future space operation, risk mechanism and capabilities, space traffic control, orbital debris, and many, many other. Some particular life science research will have to take place in area of biomedical support and advances life support system. So our suggestion that the introduction of future space exploration, including commercial space flights, require considerable development and should be addressed at the next summit. Thank you very much for your attention. some question or suggestion?
Thank you, and congratulations in pulling together what was quite a tricky group to pull together. That's a bit of an understatement. We talked a little bit about the commercial providers and the fact that they gain an awful lot from the efforts of governments in space exploration, in the expertise they inherit, and whether or not they could be contractually obliged to provide advanced professional training opportunities and or educational opportunities, given that they, if you as a federal organization or a government is offering contracts to these people, whether they can be obliged as part of that contract to provide advanced professional training opportunities in these integrated sciences. And no one was really sure whether that was possible. Anna Clark said that there was precedent for that in the energy industry, and whether the same should apply to commercial spaceflight providers.
It seems to me with commercial companies that if one proceeds along the line of exploration companies, oil and gas companies, they usually have a permission to operate clause in contracts, and that often, as part of that, they have to make some contribution to the community which they find themselves in. And in this case, of course, it's going to be space. So that there will be various things, I would hope, that would be built into their permission, as it were, to enter space. And usually part of the remit, if you like, is to make sure they contribute, certainly in remote communities, to health and education. And it seems to me if we're all going into space, companies, particularly any exploration company, should be expected to contribute to education and medical facilities.
Наверное, эти два вопроса.
Probably these two questions I would like to subdivide into two constitutive parts. It seems to me that there exists an opportunity for including special terms and conditions into a contract that pertains, for instance, to student involvement. But such lines in the contracts would only be possible if any given commercial company would participate in a space program. In that case, even student involvement is going to be logical. It will follow out of the space activity. As far as the companies that are not involved in space exploration, it's hard for me to judge about the United States and Europe, but it seems to me that even there, it would be rather difficult to create it there. There is a wish on behalf of the public that high-budget, high-profit companies would contribute to education, including educational work in terms of space exploration. But how can it be implemented officially? I don't have any suggestions to that effect. If the participants of our forum are ready to put forth such proposals, then we can evaluate, we can listen to them. It's hard for me to tell how realistic they would be, although it would be a good cause.
I mean, BP scholarships, Shell scholarships, the major oil and gas companies have a vast number of existing scholarships, and I would have thought that scholarships, programs, training would be part of the future.
I understand what we're talking about. Even in Russia, there is such an activity by companies, but such a sphere of activity is not directed solely in the space venue. Here, we try to adhere to space exploration only, and also life sciences. Yes, commercial companies make their contribution contribution into establishing scholarships. They make calls for scientific grants, but as a whole, it pertains to the broad scientific research and not specifically to our particular area, although I agree that many countries have that. And maybe it's possible to turn this a little around or to divert this stream towards the space exploration.
I think that commercial companies are probably going to be very limited in their capabilities to really devote a lot of their resources to education. But there are companies that do contribute. For example, in the United States of America, ExxonMobil, which is not a commercial space company, but which is a large oil company, puts a substantial amount of money in trying to get young people interested in science and engineering, and they make a great investment in that. I think also the universities have an obligation to really get young people interested in science and engineering. We have a program here at Rice that we do with young girls at the 10 and 11-year-old ages, where we bring them in and expose them to scientists and engineers, women scientists and engineers role models, and their families as well, bring them in to get them interested in science and engineering. And we find that really, if you're going to do that, you need to do that at ages around 10 or 11. In the UK, there is a program that the universities have adopted in Scotland, where 4 universities conduct a program where they bring young people in on weekends, 1 weekend a month from January through June, where the professors at the universities talk to these 10 and 11-year-old students, and then for a solid week during the summer, they bring space experts in to talk to these young people. That's been a very effective program, and I think when they started it out, the university professors were concerned that this was going to take up a lot of their time, but I think as it's been proven, they've got very enthused about it and very excited about the program. And in addition to get these young people interested in science and engineering, these are potential students for the university in the future. There's a program in Russia that has been adopted by Star City, where they bring young people in from all over Russia on weekends, and they put them up at Star City, the whole family, the mother and father and the students. And I think that's been a very effective program, and it's been a program where actually Star City has committed resources and is spending time with these young people again with the idea of getting them interested in science and engineering. So I think there are a lot of resources out there that are not being applied to getting these young people into science and engineering. And I think certainly the universities and some of the agencies could play a bigger role. The Johnson Space Center, for example, could be doing much more than they do on getting young people in. And I think what's being done at Star City is very admirable and I think an excellent program.
Yesterday we spoke with Sasha about this program, and she told about this program in detail, but I would also like to observe that similar programs and very broad programs exist in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Novosibirsk. When it happens twice a year. There is the Science Days, and the leading professors and scientists speak before huge audiences, university audiences, and parents and children of all ages come there. So this movement is getting bigger, and it had started, if I am not mistaken, about 5 or 6 years ago in Moscow. But right now, such activities are so so intense, and about a year ago, a platform for such activity was our institute as well, but they are usually focused, centered around Moscow State University normally nowadays, where they have special facilities, special rooms where the children are shown and told the latest achievements of science and technology. And yes, this has to be done, and this has to be continued.
Yes, I think those are all excellent programs that you've instituted there, and I think we in our country and the other partners in their countries could well adopt such a program, because I think the model you've put in place in Russia is a very good one.
I'd like to expand a little bit on the request for a panel at the next summit. The basic driver for this is the change that is going to occur as commercial enterprises get into human space flight. And they will be drawing upon people who will not have been screened and as well prepared as has been the case for any humans into space as monitored by government enterprises. There will be health issues associated with it. There will be psychological, physiological aspects that need to be addressed. And we don't, at the moment, we're not aware of any mechanism that is even considering how this aspect of life sciences should be addressed and regulated. And so some of the potential commercial operators would very much benefit, I think, from the discussion of so much expertise that exists in the forum that is normally put together here, to even begin to ask themselves some of the questions to which we think we know the answers. They don't even know the question exists. And I think there's a lot of merit in doing this. At the same time, we obviously need to be addressing the whole aspects of regulating in some manner how this commercial human spaceflight activity occurs and interfaces with the government space flights and the other commercial robotic flights that take place, because initially we'll be into suborbital flights where there won't be much interference, but not long afterwards there will be commercial flights into low Earth orbit, and that's getting pretty crowded there. And these sort of questions need to be addressed. So I would recommend that a panel that addresses, specifically focuses on the commercial introduction of human spaceflight be addressed at this forum in the future. Thank you.
Could I come back to the question about education and how to organise these things internationally? I think in groups like this, there's always a danger for us to talk about how each country should run its education programs, because there's a crossover, if you like, between the space people who want to do education and the education people who may know a little bit about space. But the education schemes in each country are so different, the needs are different, the organisations are different, the governmental groups that run these things are so different. It's very difficult to come up with an international plan, if you like, to help each country deliver its education programme. So I think it's incumbent on us in groups like this to concentrate on those areas where we can make a real difference. And I think there's three particular areas I'd like to emphasise. The first one is international aspects. The point about the space, especially that we're talking about, is that it is hugely international. And these days, schools need to focus much more on teaching their students the fact that we are in a global economy, we work globally, and space scientists, I think, are the archetypes of people working internationally. So there's a real opportunity, I suppose, for the space program to demonstrate not just the benefits of science and technology, which I think is a given, but the international aspects of how we work in the current system and in how it'll be in the future. So that's the first one. The second thing is that the space station, I think, provides a very good model of how, by international planning and forethought, we've created opportunities for education which have been hugely valuable. So making astronaut time available in small chunks, but from time to time, broadcasts by astronauts doing science experiments or talks for schools or interactions with students from space has been hugely valuable, and that's something that only a group like this can try and bed into the future program. So to plan for that to happen in the future and to increase the amount of that kind of activity, I think is something uniquely which we can do here that each individual nation can't do on its own. And then the final thing I'd like to suggest is best practice. You and George have both just mentioned several exciting educational activities that go on in your countries and elsewhere. And I'm sure that a lot of the countries that either are involved in space exploration or who wish to become involved could benefit by finding about the successful programs that you've already run. So I think sharing best practice is the third thing which international groups like this can offer. So I'd also put in a vote for future meetings of this group to include a session, if it's possible, on examples of educational programs that have really delivered, because there's an awful lot that are fantastic, there's a lot that are very good, and I have to admit there are a few which are probably less good. So we need to share the ones that really deliver, and by sharing them in an international forum, we soon discover that we have common interests in places we hadn't expected. And I mentioned in the panel the day before yesterday about Mission X. There's one example among many, many, where we've discovered things that we didn't know about each other's education systems and our common needs and how things can work and things that can happen without us having to deliver them ourselves. So anyway, I think there are three things then: sharing best practice, building in opportunities for the future, and building on those areas where we can uniquely offer something that we can't do individually. I think that's what groups like this should focus on in education. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to say that the first half of our discussion was devoted specifically to the exchange of exchange and an attempt of gaining an understanding in what is the difference in educational approaches in various countries on various levels of education. And actually, that specifically occupied a huge part of our discussion. And as a result, it was converted into a protocol, a very small phrase, a short sentence. You and I cannot alter national educational standards. We can only add to them that interesting, that exciting part that we can derive from space exploration, from the very space research itself, from space exploration, or from using the results of the space experiments to Earth medicine, as we say. And one could agree with all of your 3 points, all of your 3 proposals. However, the path here is much more complex than how we're able to phrase it. We have to add what we call add spice into education. And those people who are involved in educational work in space medicine and biology, or maybe even in rocket building, I have no idea if that's the case. They do it on a daily basis, and I would like to remark that all the C group participants, or the majority of those participants, are researchers, either past or current researchers, but they do research. And at the same time, currently, they're also teachers, they're managers, they're leaders, they lead students, they're advisors, they're professors. So they've been carrying it throughout their whole lives. And as far as the organization and an attempt of many organizations, including NASA, and at our group it has been observed that NASA probably does more than any other, or not necessarily put together, because ESA does a lot of things in that regard, but at present NASA makes their best effort in order to deliver that knowledge to all the educational entities and to all the people. And also another aspect is that parents are the first ones perhaps who have to be educated. They have to derive all the novelties that derive from space sciences and convey it to their children respectively, and to make them motivated and interested, the new generation that is. As far as the integration of top-level education, then it's a little simpler there. We can exchange, we can do student exchange. We do that. We discussed that. But last year I have reread the protocol, and I noticed that one of the professors made a serious remark. And those who participate in real space research, they will understand me. That particular project which the scientist writes about in order to implement on the International Space Station, prior to the actual implementation, there is a great distance. And when we accept a student or a graduate student, we already have that project. It hasn't been implemented completely, but it's already moving ahead. It's on its rails. And then when the graduate student comes for 3 years, we're hoping that the graduate student will complete that work. Education and familiarization with space exploration and space research, that has to be delivered to the maximum. But involvement of students to work of scientists, this is a more complex task, but it is being implemented in all of the organizations. And the third thing, which is international cooperation, if I am not mistaken, here in this area, also certain efforts are made. For instance, our small institute, IBMP, we're not even an agency, but we have an agreement that affords us implementation of experiments. Maybe I am wrong. Probably it's an agreement that is signed with 30 institutes and agencies. And based on this agreement, we accept graduate students on the basis to the base of our institute. In the laboratories, we have educational interchange, and I'm hoping to have a separate agreement on student exchange with Air and Space, London Air and Space Center. I want to say that everyone who is sitting here and who had participated in Group C discussion, and also many of those whom we represent here, are working in that direction. And I understand that that it wasn't completely transparent to you in today's report of this group, but this happened only because we have analyzed last year's report, and a lot of specific items were contained in that report, and specifically for each separate group, because those approaches differ for school children, for students, and for graduate students. But we're ready to add that, and we're ready to add current recommendations and proposals.
Maybe as a follow-up of the international aspect of this discussion, we've been talking so much about the international cooperations and all the difficulties we all have, among all the countries. And it's already been once discussed already, I think on the last summit. Maybe it's time for us to think about to formalize the education of that aspect. For example, to have a International Research Project Management 101 course type or a seminar or something like that. And we have many specialists involved in the international programs. We have astronauts trained and so on. It could be probably useful to share with the young students on all levels, maybe high school and maybe college level, or maybe on the doctoral programs, to educate them about the challenges they will have when they run international program. We already have a hands-on experience when we have exchange students, but maybe we can make a theory out of it, maybe, to formalize the certain aspects. What to expect if you go for a research program in Europe? What to expect if you come to Russia, for example, or come to the States? It's just a suggestion.
I think it's a good suggestion. No, but there are some difficulties to create such type agreement, because actually it's more simply to create a bilateral agreement and start to discuss such type of question. Another part.
Let me clarify.
Just a minute, Igor. Just a minute. Another possibility to create some special, seminar or summer school, and involve a lot of people from many countries, and develop such type of education.
I was talking about a much simpler way. There was no agreement I was talking about. I was saying that on a university level, for example, on the first year students could have a optional seminar for international research program management type, where we would line up certain principles of the international program management. That's all to it.
Okay. Any question?
First, I want to say, Dr. Burkov, I think that you and Dr. Sutton have made a lot of progress in a joint program that really got started, you might say, from scratch, but by ideas and trying to offer opportunities that would fit into those kinds of ideas. One thing that was mentioned yesterday, and I think that's excellent, one thing that was mentioned yesterday that is of some concern if it's not addressed in some more deliberate fashion, and that is this so-called brain drain that we seem to be experiencing in a variety of ways. It's not just one direction or another, but does this really suggest that perhaps there should be more emphasis on the broadening of that fundamental education to enable people to actually bridge into other disciplines or move into other disciplines more easily than we have now? In some ways, I think the strict pathway process can be discouraging to students, and many then choose an easier pathway. But maybe they don't see the opportunities as broadly as they might otherwise if there was a little bit more bridging and openness. That's just my thought and impression. But it is a concern that we do see a lot of people who go through careers and then they either don't find jobs or they don't carry on in those careers.
Это действительно проблема, причем...
This is a problem indeed, and I think that this is not only a problem that exists in Russia and in the post-Soviet era regions. We communicate with our colleagues from Europe, and I also hear similar things about the symptoms of brain drain. As far as Russia is concerned, then I think that everyone here would understand me. Having completed graduate school and having successfully defended PhD, all the young people whom we already call young scientists seek their own path of self-realization, and there are two major parts which they pay attention to. The first one is self-actualization. For smart people, for natural science researchers, this issue takes first priority. And the second part is, the second nuance that they take into account is the subjects of self-sufficiency. Being self-sufficient in one's own life is important. And in reality, I'm not too upset when talented scientists start working at a different lab and move science forward and succeed. I don't think it's worse. It maybe is even better when in our country they start doing business and if we're talking about business, it's not a top-level business, but this is people's personal. It comes to people's personal decisions. Of course, we can provide more attractive opportunities or potentials in science for young scientists, and our scientists try to create that. In addition, in Russia, there is a number of programs which allow young scientists room for self-actualization. Those are young scientist grants, all kinds of support. Is that sufficient? I don't think so. Is it going to be expanded? I hope so. And also, student exchange, graduate student exchange is very important, so that they have an opportunity to do some work abroad and come back. And in Russia and in France, such programs are well developed. And moreover, foreign students defend their PhDs in Russian and in France in English based on the rules that exist in France. And therefore, they have two equivalent diplomas, a PhD degree and a science degree, and they come back, they work abroad, and those are different paths, because nowadays, and thank goodness for that, the pathways in science are open, the exchange is open, the resources exchange is open, and the people exchange is open. Right now, there is a program in Russia that in which the famous scientists who work abroad come back to Russia and create their own labs and attract new young people. And this is a very attractive aspect because those labs are organized much better than the usual run-of-the-mill labs for regular professors in Russia. So yes, we do have to give it our best, but you cannot force anyone to stay.
Excellent points, and Dr. Alford, you're absolutely correct. This is a real challenge, and we have a number of graduate students who spend years in laboratories and postdocs who don't end up in science and do leave other careers after multiple postdocs. But what we're doing, I think, and you are doing, and with your group, is increasing opportunities with students by providing the experiences that make them more academically prepared to do a whole bunch of different things. And the international exchange is one thing, having opportunities for the students to work at in NASA research centers in the summer, where we're in our postdoc activities within SBRI, we're requiring a documentation that mentorship is actually occurring with the students versus just putting them in a cubicle and seeing them 5 years later. So having the interaction between them and their major scientists are important. So, but the challenge is there for all of us.
just like to make one brief comment about to try and increase the relevance of this field of science in a way, because while we're focused on the space environment, it might have a broader appeal if we were thinking of courses on survival in extreme environments generally, which is of relevance, with climate change and so on. And maybe if we take this approach, it might be more relevant for students in a broader sense.
Абсолютно с вами согласна, и в рамках
I agree with you 100%, and as part of our Russian-French combined laboratory project, what we study there is not just the spaceflight impacts, but other extreme environment impacts too, both on physiological levels, holistic physiological level, all the way down to cellular level. But we do across the board, top to bottom screening, not just for the space environment and space flight impacts, even though they are an indelible part of that, of course.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are in time.
Yes, actually, it's amazing how it can turn out and conclude in time with very good discussion and thorough discussion. I want to simply express my deep appreciation to everyone who's participated in this summit. I think it's been really a quite successful one. A lot of great ideas have been exchanged. I think a pathway for the future has been described very well, and I think these recommendations for future summits are most welcome, and George and I will certainly pore over those as we go forward. Thank you. But thank you for being here. It's been an honor to have you here.
Yes, I would like to thank you all for being here for all 3 days and another great summit. And I hope we can continue this next year. And I think we've had some good suggestions on panels for next year, and would welcome your suggestions on other improvements that we could make for next year. Certainly, Igor would want you to make an input as to what direction we should go. So thank you all, and appreciate it very much.